Got the 1938 BSA taken apart. This one is pretty dirty. You can see inside the stock here, it's got a lot of bugs and dirt and all kinds of stuff in there. Right here under where the butt plate was is pretty dirty as well. There's some rust on the rear sling swivel here. Got the top handguard, and needs to be cleaned out as well. Looks to be in decent shape. Now the front top handguard was in two pieces, so basically what was keeping it together was the nose cap here and then pressing it up against the rear sight here. So it didn't really seem to be broken at the time, but after I took it apart I could see that it had actually broken here at some point. It's possible that it was pretty much left that way and used that way with Ethiopians. As you can see, other than that, the wood's in pretty decent shape. Looking at the receiver, you can see the mark so far looks pretty decent, should clean up pretty well. There actually was no screw here, it was a pin, so at some point either the threads were worn out or something happened. It was actually a pin that was driven through here, so not a huge deal, but it is an issue. I'll be taking this apart as well as I clean it out. I'll be taking off the magazine cutoff as well. See, there's some markings that are starting to come through that I'll be able to examine after I clean it. Also the inspection marks. You can see there's some surface rust on the barrel, but it doesn't look like it's bad. Doesn't look like there's any real pitting or anything. Nothing serious. Barrel looks like it's in pretty good shape. Just really dirty. I imagine this is probably what they look like before they get hit by a wire wheel. So that's probably why the Ethiopians did it, is they wanted to get rid of all the surface rust, but pretty much ruined the finish by doing that. So I definitely prefer this over a wire wheel. It's got all the small parts in this pot. I'm going to boil and card them. You can see there's been some interesting additions to these parts. So inside the bolt they had this spring, which looks like some kind of homemade spring from the Ethiopians. You can see they added some extra spring tension here at the end. This is what a normal #1 spring looks like, so this is a spare I'll be replacing it with. You can see it looks like they took the spring from another rifle and basically modified it to sort of make it work. See, the magazine's in pretty good shape. Butt plate has a lot of corrosion on the brass, but that should clean right off. Really surprised how much bluing is actually on the rifle. Normally the finish is pretty much gone, so this one actually has quite a bit of it considering. You see, especially on the nose cap, just some surface rust. So I'll go ahead and boil and card these parts, and we'll see how they look after I'm done. So got all the parts cleaned up, oiled. You can see this butt plate came out really nicely. I took this all apart and cleaned it out. Looks pretty good. Got a lot of the rust scale off of the nose cap. There's still some really stubborn rust scale spots that I'll just have to let the oil sit on it and sort of soften it up, and then continue cleaning that off. This rear sling swivel has some really stubborn rust scale on it. Just going to hit it with the brass brush another time before I put it all back together. You can see the bolt cleaned up really nicely. Got all of that rust off of it. See, the trigger guard looks pretty good too. You see the magazine did okay. The carding helped a little bit, but not really too much. Stock bolt cleaned up really well too. So overall the parts are pretty decent. The carding did a pretty decent job with this rear sight protector as well. Converted a lot of that rust into bluing. Highly recommend that technique. You can see it's pretty clean now. It's got a pretty good marking on it. You can see a lot of the rust scales removed. There's still some little spots here and there, but some time and oil and then a good brass brush will get rid of that, as well as some steel wool. You can see the finish overall is pretty decent on this, just some rust scale and a little bit of pitting on the outside. Moving on the barrel, you can see the barrel's in pretty good shape, especially where it was covered up by the wood. Bluing looks pretty good. It's got some nice finish on it. See the rear sight cleaned up well too. It's not as bad as it was before. Just a few little spots of stubborn rust scale. See here the top of the action. It's cleaning up nicely. So I'm going to do one more wipe down of all the parts, oil them, and I'll reassemble it and show you how it all looks. It's got the rifle reassembled. Take a closer look at it. Same with the butt plate. It came up pretty well. The screws are cleaned out. Cleaned all the corrosion out inside of it as well. You can see that stock disc there. Put some chalk in the numbers. Looks like a 7 over a 752. Could be like a rack number or something. You can see a little stock repair here. Cleaned out the rear swivel pretty well. See another stock repair up here. Some scratches here. Moving up the rifle. See the marking came up pretty well. You got GR for King George. Birmingham Small Arms Company, 1938. Shortly Mark III. So this is not a Mark III star. Got a surface crack here. Finish on this one's actually not too bad compared to a lot of the other RTI rifles. It's come up pretty nicely. I think this one was largely saved from the wire wheel. See, there's a lot of finish on the rear sight protector. Normally that's pretty much in the white. It's interesting to see that they took a piece of wood here to make the full length required instead of the two separate pieces here to keep the top hand guards from shifting. Not sure if that's something the Ethiopians did or if that was something that was done during one of the factory repairs somewhere, but it's kind of an interesting modification here. See the rear sight cleaned up pretty nicely as well. It was covered in rust scale. It looks a lot better after some oiling and carding and good brass brush. This is probably one of the most dirty Enfields I've got from them so far, just with the amount of rust scale and hardened grease. But that's probably because they didn't wire wheel it, so I much prefer that over the wire wheel. Wood looks pretty good. Even though this is two separate pieces, seems to be holding up pretty well. You can see the nose cap's in pretty nice shape. It's got a lot of finish left on it. Cleaned it really nicely with some boiling water and carding. Went and attached a reproduction sling to it. See, the underside of the rifle is pretty good. This is fortunately only a surface crack. Wood looks pretty good. The underside of the nose cap here also turned out pretty nicely. There's a ton of rust scale on it and got pretty much all of that off. And turn over. See, the other side of the buttstock looks pretty good too. Did replace the screw here. I took one off one of my drill purpose rifles. The pin that was put in there just kept kind of sliding out, so just put a screw in there. Luckily the threads were still intact. You can see the receiver is a little rough, just on the finish. I did notice that the extractor here, the spring for it, is broken, so we'll have to replace that. It's a pretty easy fix, but when I cleaned this out, there was just a ton of just hardened grease in there, and the spring is broken in half. So that's a repair I'll have to do. This unfortunately is cracked through the stock, so I'll have to repair that before I shoot it. You can see it's not too bad, doesn't move or anything, but it did crack through. A little bit of marring here on the stock, probably from storage. Could possibly be that there's rifles stacked on top of it or something, but something marred it up pretty good there. Another side of that nose cap looks pretty good. So overall, pretty good example of an Enfield from World Tiger Imports. Got a few more repairs to do on it before I can shoot it, but looks pretty good overall. I'll go ahead and take a look at the bore. You can see the bore is in pretty good shape. It's definitely shootable. So if you're looking for an Enfield from World Tiger Imports, I think they're still on sale. You can get a B grade for a pretty reasonable price. Go ahead and check it out. Should have a few more videos coming out. I'll have a post-range report on the 74 I got from Rally Defense and a couple other projects I have coming up. So if you'd like to be alerted to those, feel free to subscribe and sign up for alerts. And as always, thanks for watching.